I never locked my door at night. Not because I wasn't afraid of the dark, but because something in me had always known, deep in the part of me I couldn't explain, that whatever was going to change my life would come from out there. I was a simple herbalist in a village small enough to have no secrets. No past worth telling. No future worth dreaming about. Just the forest at my back, my herbs on the sill, and a strange, hollow ache I had never been able to name. Then one night, past midnight, when even the wolves had gone quiet, he appeared at the edge of my yard. Tall. Bleeding. Eyes like fire banked under ice. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world he recognized. I didn't know then that he was the Alpha King. I didn't know he would come back every night. And I didn't know that the night he finally remembered my name, he would be cursed to kill me. The village of Mayafall was the kind of place people forgot on purpose. It sat between two hills like something tucked away at the back of a drawer, small enough that everyone knew your name, quiet enough that silence was considered a virtue. There were no grand houses, no marketplace gossip that hadn't been recycled 100 times, no visitors from the Northern Territories who stayed longer than a night. Lena Ashford liked it that way. She lived at the very edge of the village, where the last cobblestone path dissolved into dark soil and the dark soil dissolved into the Mayafall forest. Her cottage was small and smelled permanently of dried rosemary, yarrow, and the particular kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself but settles into everything, into the grain of the wooden table, into the silence between two heartbeats, into the way a woman pours herself tea in the morning and doesn't look at the second chair. She had no family left to speak of. A mother who had died when Lena was 9, a father who had wandered into the forest one winter and simply not returned. The village elder had told her, with practiced gentleness, that sometimes people needed to go. Lena had been 12 years old. She had learned then that the world did not pause for grief, and so neither would she. She became an herbalist. It suited her, the patience of it, the quietness, the way plants didn't ask questions. She knew which root drew fever out through the skin, which bark steeped into something that could slow a fast heart, which flowers pressed between her palms and held against a wound could stop a man from bleeding out on her kitchen floor. That last knowledge would matter sooner than she expected. The strange feeling had started 3 weeks before she ever saw him. It crept in at the edges of her evenings, a prickling along the back of her neck when she stepped outside at dusk, a pull in her chest that faced northeast toward the tree line and did not let go. She had told herself it was the season changing. Told herself it was the wind off the hills carrying unfamiliar scents. Told herself it was nothing. But nothing doesn't make you stand at your window at midnight with your fingers pressed to the glass. Nothing doesn't make you leave your door unlocked. The first night she saw him, there was no moon. It was the kind of dark that has weight to it, the kind that presses against the skin and makes the world feel like it has shrunk to a single room. Lena had woken from a dreamless sleep with her pulse hammering for no reason she could name. She had pulled on her coat. She had gone to the door. And she had opened it. He was standing at the far edge of her yard where the lantern light ran out, half consumed by shadow, so still she might have convinced herself he was a trick of her tired eyes. Except that her eyes were not tired. And tricks of the dark do not bleed. The blood was dark against his shirt. It moved with him when he breathed, a slow, labored breath that she could see even from 10 feet away. "Who are you?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He didn't answer. His eyes were on her face with an intensity that made her stomach drop, not from fear exactly, but from something stranger. Recognition. That was what it looked like. Recognition, in the eyes of a man she had never seen before in her life. Then he took one step forward and his legs nearly gave. Lena moved before she decided to. She crossed the yard, ducked under his arm, felt the enormous weight of him shift against her shoulder. He was tall, broader than anyone she had encountered in Mayafall, and every inch of him radiated heat the way a stone does after a long day in the sun. Up close his eyes were dark amber, almost golden, and right now they were fighting to stay open. "You need to sit," she said, not a question. "I need to," he started, and then stopped, jaw tightening like he had caught himself saying something he hadn't meant to. "Whatever you need to do," she said, "you'll do it better without a hole in your side." He let her guide him inside. She worked quickly and quietly, the way she always did. The wound was deep, a gash along his ribs that had been opened by something more violent than a blade. She had seen animal wounds before. This was different. The edges of the cut were already beginning to close on their own in a way that made her press her lips together and ask no questions. She stitched what needed stitching. She packed the wound with yarrow and comfrey. She gave him water and he drank it like he had forgotten what water was. At some point he fell into a shallow sleep in her chair by the hearth. Lena sat on the floor across from him, her back against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest, and watched the firelight move across his face. He was not like anyone she had ever seen. There was something in the way he existed in a room, even unconscious, even wounded, that made the room smaller. Like the air had arranged itself around him. She did not sleep. When the sky outside her window shifted from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before dawn, she blinked and he was gone. The chair was empty. The fire had burned low. There was nothing left of him except the faint smell of pine and deep earth and something she couldn't name, something that made the hollow ache in her chest quiet, just slightly, for the first time in years. She told herself it was a dream. She knew it wasn't. The second night, she didn't go to bed at all. She sat at the window with a cup of tea cooling between her palms and she waited. She told herself she was being foolish. She told herself that whatever wounded man had wandered onto her property had found his way home and she would never see him again and that was entirely fine. And then, at the same hour, past the same reach of the lantern light, he stepped out of the forest. This time he wasn't bleeding. This time he walked to her door and knocked. Lena opened it before he had finished. They looked at each other in the doorway and neither of them said anything for a long moment that felt much longer than it was. "You didn't have to come back," she finally said. "I know," he said. His voice was low and unhurried and carried the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to be raised to fill a room. "Are you going to tell me your name?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not evasion exactly. More like a door being considered from the inside. "Not tonight," he said. She should have told him to leave. She stepped back and let him in. And that was how it began, the visits that came every night and ended before dawn, the man with golden eyes who sat in her kitchen and watched the fire like it owed him something, who asked her careful questions about her herbs and her village and her life while never offering a single thing about his own. She learned the shape of his silences before she learned anything else about him. She learned that when something amused him, it showed only in the corner of his mouth. That he took his tea without sweetening. That when she moved around the kitchen with her back to him, she could feel his eyes tracking her, not with hunger, not yet, but with the focused attention of someone watching something they are terrified of losing sight of. On the seventh night, he said something that she turned over in her mind for days afterward. She had been reaching across the table for a jar and her wrist had brushed his hand and they had both gone very still. "I don't understand it," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Understand what?" His eyes were on the place where their skin had touched. "Why you feel like something I have been missing my whole life," he said quietly, "when I have never met you before." The fire crackled. Lena's heart did something complicated and quiet behind her ribs. She did not have an answer for him. But somewhere in her chest, in that hollow place that had ached for as long as she could remember, something that had been empty for a very long time, began, slowly, to fill. The name came to her on a Tuesday morning, the way bad news always does, quietly, wrapped in someone else's conversation. She had gone into the village center to trade a bundle of dried elderflower for candle wax, and old Petra, who ran the trade stall and knew everything about everyone within 50 miles, had leaned across her counter with the particular expression of a woman delivering information she had been saving like good wine. "They're saying the Alpha King has been moving through the northern territories," Petra said, not looking up from her counting. "Sorellen Voss passed through Grey Hollow 3 nights back. Left the whole village shaking." Lena kept her face still. "What does he want in this part of the region?" "Nobody knows. That's what makes it worse." Petra finally looked up. "They say he's been wandering at night. Alone. His own packmates can't account for him after dark. They find him at dawn and he remembers nothing of where he's been." Lena's hands, resting on the counter, did not move. "They say his eyes go gold when he's in it," Petra continued, lowering her voice like the trees had ears. "His wolf takes over. Has done for months. Whatever's wrong with him, nobody's been able to fix it." Lena walked home without the candle wax. She stood in her kitchen for a long time, looking at the chair by the hearth. At the faint impression in the cushion. At the cup she had washed and replaced on the shelf and would set out again tonight without asking herself why. Sorellen Voss. She had heard the name before. Everyone in every village within 100 miles had. The Alpha King of the Northern Pax, the man who had ended the Blackridge War in a single night and never spoken of it again. Feared in the way that weather is feared, not because it is cruel, but because it is simply larger than everything around it and answers to no one. She tried to lay that name over the man who sat in her kitchen and turned his teacup in his hands like he was solving something. It fit. That was the terrible thing. It fit exactly. That night she waited for him the way she always did, except this time she was standing when he came through the door, and her arms were crossed, and she looked at him with the steadiest eyes she had. He stopped when he saw her expression. "You know," he said. It wasn't a question. "Sorellen Voss," she said. The name landed between them like something heavy dropped from a height. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw shifted. Then, and this was the thing that undid every careful wall she had been building, he looked away from her, toward the window, and in his profile she saw something she hadn't expected. Not arrogance. Not threat. Exhaustion. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice softer now despite herself. "I suspected from the second night," he said. "The way you weren't afraid of me. Most people," he stopped. "Most people run," she finished. He turned back to her and his amber eyes were very direct. "Yes. Why don't you tell me yourself? In the mornings, when she searched for the word. Myself, a dark, humorless sound in the back of his throat. "I don't remember any of this in the mornings. I wake in my camp and my second-in-command briefs me on the day and I have no memory of the night. None." He looked at his own hands. "I have been losing hours since spring." The fire was the only sound in the room. "But your wolf knows," Lena said carefully. "He finds his way here." Something moved through Sorellen's expression then, complicated and raw and quickly controlled. "Every night," he said quietly. Without fail. She should have asked him to leave. She should have closed her door and bolted it and told herself that whatever this was, it was not hers to carry. Instead she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at him until he sat down too. "Tell me what you remember," she said. And he did. The nights that followed were different after that. The careful distance between them didn't disappear, but it became a different kind of distance, the kind that exists not because two people are strangers but because they both understand that the space between them is the last safe thing. He told her about the Northern Pax, not in the way a king speaks of territory, but in the way a person speaks of something they are quietly devoted to. He told her about the Blackridge War without pride. He told her about his wolf, Sable, who had been restless for months before the night wandering began, who pressed against the inside of Sorellen's chest like something caged. Lena told him about her herbs. About her father walking into the forest. About the hollow ache she had carried since childhood that she had simply accepted as the price of being who she was. He listened to her the way no one had ever listened to her, not waiting for a pause to fill, not looking for somewhere else to be. Just present, utterly, in the way of someone who understands what it means to be given something rare. On the 12th night he reached across the table and covered her hand with his without explanation. She turned her hand over and held his back. Neither of them spoke about it. Then the dreams began. They came to Lena in the deep hours, after Sorellen had gone and the cottage had settled back into its usual silence. Not nightmares, something stranger and more specific. Images that arrived with the emotional texture of memory rather than imagination. A younger version of Sorellen laughing at something she had apparently said. A meadow she did not recognize but somehow knew. Her own hands, smaller, placing a crown of woven grass on his head while he sat very still and tried not to smile and failed. She woke from them gasping, not from fear but from grief, the particular grief of losing something she couldn't remember having. It was Mirella who finally gave her the shape of it. Mirella was the oldest woman in Myrefall, old enough that people had stopped calculating her age and simply accepted her presence the way they accepted the hills. She kept to herself, grew things in her garden that Lena recognized but had never been able to source, and occasionally appeared at Lena's door with a piece of information that she had apparently been holding until the exact correct moment. She appeared on a grey Thursday afternoon, let herself in without knocking, and sat down in the chair that Sorellen used. "You've been having the dreams," Mirella said. Lena turned from the window. "How do you know about the dreams?" "Because I was waiting for them." Mirella folded her hands in her lap. "They're not dreams, child. They're memories. Yours. Returned." The kitchen felt suddenly very small. Returned from where? Mirella looked at her with eyes that were clear and direct and very sad. From where they were taken, she paused. Sit down, Lena. This is going to be difficult to hear, and I need you to hear all of it before you react. Lena Saturday. You and Sorellen Voss are fated mates, Mirella said plainly. Bound before either of you had language for what that meant. The bond was formed when you were young, before the war, before his rise to king. It was real, and it was complete, and you were known to each other. The silence in the room had a particular quality to it, the silence of something enormous approaching. Then someone took that from you, Mirella continued. A curse, placed with precision and malice. It did not simply block the bond, it erased you from his memory entirely. Not his heart. Hearts don't work that way. His wolf, Sable, never forgot. But the man, every morning he woke and you did not exist. Who? Lena said. Her voice was very quiet. Someone inside his own bloodline. Mirella held her gaze. Someone who understood that the one thing that could make Sorellen Voss vulnerable was a mate he would die protecting. Lena pressed her hands flat against her thighs to keep them still. But that's not the worst of it, Mirella said. The curse has a condition. A lock built into its structure, deliberately. If Sorellen's memory fully returns, if he remembers you completely, in the daylight, with his mind and not just his wolf's instinct, she stopped. Then what? Mirella's eyes were steady and full of sorrow. Then the curse compels him to end your life. It was designed that way. So that the very act of remembering you becomes the thing that destroys you. Love made into a weapon. The fire had burned very low. Lena stared at the floor for a long moment. He's starting to remember, she said finally. During the days. He told me, fragments. My voice. The way the cottage smells. I know, Mirella said. That's why I came today and not next week. Outside, the sky was the color of iron. In the forest behind the cottage, somewhere deep in the dark space between the trees, something large and quiet was making its way toward her in the way it always did when the sun began to go down. Lena closed her eyes. She understood now what the hollow ache had been. All those years of it, not an absence of something yet to come, but the presence of something already taken. She opened her eyes. Is there a way to break it? She asked. Mirella was quiet for a long moment. There is one, she said. But it requires a choice that can only be made by him. Before she could explain further, the door opened. Sorellen stood in the frame, and he was different tonight. She could see it immediately. His eyes were brighter, almost restless. His stillness had an edge to it. He looked at Mirella and Mirella looked at him, and something passed between them that Lena didn't fully catch. Then he looked at Lena. I remembered something today, he said. While I was awake, his voice had a tension running beneath it like a current. Your garden. The way the sage looks in the morning, he paused. I didn't know how I knew that. I had never been here in the daylight. Lena stood up slowly. Across the room, Mirella rose from the chair and pulled her coat closed. I'll leave you both, the old woman said, and walked to the door. She paused beside Sorellen on her way out and said, quietly and only to him, the choice will come soon. When it does, you will know it is yours. She left. Sorellen looked at Lena across the small kitchen, and in his eyes she could see it, the fractures forming, the light of memory beginning to press through the dark places the curse had built. She should have told him to go. To stop coming. To let the forgetting hold just a little longer. I know what you are to me, he said. His voice was low and unsteady in a way she had never heard from him. I can feel it. I don't have the full shape of it yet, but I can feel it and it's... Sorellen, she said softly. He stopped. I know too, she said. I found out today her throat was tight. And I need you to know something before this goes any further. She looked at him steadily. I'm not going to ask you to stop remembering. Even knowing what it means. The air between them was very still. What does it mean? He asked quietly. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She looked up into those amber eyes that had found her every night for weeks, and she held his gaze with everything she had. It means when you fully remember me, she said, you will be cursed to kill me. The sound he made was not a word. It was something underneath language, something that came from the part of him that was sable, old and wolf-deep and furious. His hands came up and cupped her face with a tenderness so fierce it hurt to witness. Then I won't remember, he said, his voice cracking at the edges. You won't be able to stop it, she whispered. It's already happening. Outside, the wind moved through the Mayafall forest and the trees said nothing and everything at once. And Lena, who had lived so quietly and so alone for so long, pressed her forehead to the chest of a man who was slowly remembering her into something that could destroy them both. And stayed.it happened in pieces. Not all at once, that might have been easier. Instead it came the way light comes through a cracked wall, thin at first, then wider, then impossible to block. On the first morning after Mireille's visit, Sorellen woke in his camp with the smell of rosemary in his lungs and a name on the edge of his tongue that dissolved before he could grip it. His second-in-command, Finn, watched him over breakfast with the careful eyes of a man who had learned not to ask questions, and said nothing. On the second morning, it was her voice. Not words, just the particular quality of it, low and unhurried, the way she said his name without the weight other people put into it. By the fourth morning, he knew the shape of her hands. He had never in his life been afraid of himself. He had been afraid for his people, afraid of failure, afraid once, years ago, in a flash of something he had quickly buried, of losing something he couldn't even name. But he had never looked inward with fear. He was afraid now. He called Dorian to his tent on the fifth morning. His younger brother arrived looking composed, which was how Dorian always looked, carefully, deliberately composed, in the way of a man who has practiced the expression. They were alike in build, different in everything else. Where Sorellen was direct, Dorian was lateral. Where Sorellen thought in straight lines, Dorian thought in angles. There's something wrong with me, Sorellen said, without preamble. I know, Dorian said. The quietness of his answer made Sorellen go still. How do you know? Dorian sat down across from him. His hands were very still in his lap. There was something in his face, not guilt, not exactly, but the expression of a man who has been carrying weight that has finally become too heavy and is deciding, in this exact moment, whether to set it down. Because I'm the one who knew about it, Dorian said. Not the one who cast it. I want to be precise about that. I did not curse you. But I knew, and I said nothing, because I was told. His voice broke slightly, recovered. I was told it was protecting you. The air in the tent changed. Tell me everything, Sorellen said. His voice was very quiet. That particular quiet that the people closest to him had learned to be more afraid of than shouting. And Dorian did. It had been their uncle, Revel Voss, who had managed the northern Pack territories during the Blackridge War while Sorellen was at the front. Revel, who had watched his nephew return from battle with a mate bond already formed, with a girl from a border village who was not pure-blooded Pack, who was not politically useful, who complicated every alliance Revel had spent 2 years carefully arranging. Revel had gone to a curse worker from the Eastern Highlands. Had paid generously. Had framed it, to Dorian, as safeguarding the king from a vulnerability his enemies could exploit. Dorian had been 22 years old. He had believed him. Revel had been dead for 3 years now, a winter fever, nothing dramatic, and the curse had outlived him, ticking along without its architect, patient and purposeless except for the lock it had built into its structure. The kill clause. The cruel insurance that if the memory ever returned, it would return as a blade. She is real, Sorellen said when Dorian finished. What I feel at night, she is real. Her name is Lena Ashford, Dorian said quietly. She lives at the edge of Mayafall village. She has lived there alone since she was 12 years old, waiting for something she didn't have words for. Sorellen stood up and walked to the tent opening and stood there with his back to his brother, looking out at the tree line. His hands were shaking. He did not turn around when he spoke. If I fully remember her. The compulsion activates, Dorian said. That's how it was designed. The memory completing triggers it, a pause. Mireille believes there is a way to break it. But she said the way is not about avoiding the memory. It's about what you do in the moment the compulsion comes. What does that mean? She wouldn't tell me. She said it could only be understood in the moment. Sorellen stood in the tent opening for a long time. Sable moved inside him, not restless now, not caged. Steady. Certain. A deep, old, unfrightened certainty pressing upward through his chest like a root finding water. He knew what he had to do. He went to her that night, earlier than usual. The sun had barely finished setting. Lena opened the door before he reached it and looked at his face and understood immediately that tonight was different. She stepped back. He came inside and she closed the door and they stood in the kitchen and neither of them pretended that things were what they had been. It's tonight, he said. I know. I can feel it. The last of it, he pressed a hand to his chest. It's right there. All of it. She nodded. She was very calm in the way that people are calm when they have already moved through their fear and come out the other side into something clearer. I need you to understand something first, she said. Lena. Let me finish. Her voice was steady and her eyes were direct. I spent 12 years with a hollow place inside me that I didn't understand and couldn't fill. I spent the rest of my life being so careful, so quiet, so small, because I thought that was what survival required. She paused. And then you walked out of my forest bleeding and sat in my kitchen and looked at me like I was something worth finding. Her throat moved. Whatever happens tonight, you gave me that. And I am not going to stand here and ask you not to remember me just to keep myself safe. I would rather be fully known and in danger than be safe and invisible. The fire was very low. Sorellen crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her against him with a carefulness that was more devastating than force. The carefulness of someone holding something they know is fragile not because it is weak but because it matters. I remember the meadow, he said into her hair, his voice rough. With the grass crown. You made me hold still and I kept moving and you threatened to put it on the dog instead. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else entirely. I remember the first time I heard you laugh, he said. I remember thinking I would burn down anything that ever made you stop. She felt it happening, the warmth of it, moving through the air between them, the curse tightening like a wire drawn taut. I remember your name, he said. I remember every version of your name. The way my mother said it when she introduced us. The way I said it the night I told you I loved you. The way I must have said it 1,000 times since then in whatever part of me refused to let you go entirely. The compulsion hit like a hand closing around his throat. She felt him go rigid against her. She felt his hands, those enormous, careful hands, tremble against her back. She looked up at his face and saw the war happening there, his jaw locked, his eyes flooding with something that was not him, some externally imposed command pressing down through the curse like a weight, trying to move his hands, trying to weaponize the very love that had broken the forgetting. Sorellen, she said quietly. His eyes, still fighting, found hers. I see you, she said. Not the curse. You. A sound came out of him that was barely human, grief and fury and effort, all at once. His hands, which the compulsion was trying to raise, stayed where they were. Stayed. She watched him choose, not dramatically, not with the particular grandeur of stories, but in the ordinary devastating way that real choices are made, through the body, through the will, through the refusal to be moved even a single inch in a direction that the truest part of him would not go. The curse fractured. She heard it, not with her ears, but with some part of her that was older than her memory and had been waiting for this exact moment since she was 9 years old in a village that didn't know what she was. A sound like ice over a deep river when the spring finally comes. A breaking that is not an ending. The light in the kitchen seemed to shift. Sorellen's knees hit the floor. She went down with him, her hands on his face, and he pressed his forehead to hers and they stayed that way in the quiet wreckage of something that had tried very hard to be permanent and had failed. It's gone, he said finally. His voice was wrecked and wondering. I can feel that it's gone. I know, she said. It didn't work because you didn't, she said simply. Outside, the Mayafall forest was still. No wind. Even the night birds had gone quiet. Then, slowly, the sound came back, the ordinary sounds of the world resuming itself, cicadas and branches and the distant movement of water, the world deciding to continue. Sorellen lifted his head and looked at her in the way he had looked at her that very first night, like she was the only thing he recognized. Except this time there was no confusion in it. No searching. Just the clear, uncomplicated certainty of a man who has found the thing he was looking for and knows it with every part of himself. I remember you, he said. All of it. Every piece. I know you do, she said. He looked around her small kitchen, at the herbs on the sill, at the 2 cups on the table, at the low fire and the second chair, and something moved through his expression, tender and furious at once. You've been here alone all this time. So have you, she said. In your own way. He was quiet for a moment. I have a territory to return to, he said. And things to address regarding my uncle's choices. And a great deal to do that cannot be done from a cottage at the edge of a village. I know. I want you to come with me. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had come out of her forest bleeding and stubborn and full of a love that not even a purposefully designed curse had been able to kill completely. Ask me properly, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, that small, barely there shift she had learned to read as the fullness of his amusement. Lena Ashford, he said, who made me hold still for a grass crown and never once asked me to be anything other than what I actually am. Will you come with me? She pretended to consider it. Only if you tell Finn, she said. Yourself. I'm not being introduced as the woman who wandered in. Done. And I'm bringing my herbs. Obviously. And the chair. He looked at the chair. He looked back at her. The chair comes, he said. She laughed, the full version of it, the one she hadn't given freely in years, and it filled the small kitchen completely, and Sorellen Voss, the alpha king of the northern packs, who had ended wars and survived curses and spent months walking through the dark toward something he couldn't name, closed his eyes and held the sound of it in his chest like a man who has finally, after a very long time, come home. In the morning, for the first time, he was still there when the light came in. And she made him tea. And he stayed.